Hello and welcome to Question Quick Clips. My name is Dr. Lina Majdalany, and today I'm going to be going over a question in Content Area B of the TCO. The purpose of these quick clips is to give you some tools for tackling and breaking down questions, as well as helping you analyze your errors. Today, we will tackle a multiple choice question that lands in TCO Area B.22. I won't tell you that subtask yet. It might give away the answer. So let's go ahead and get started. You'll notice here I only listed the question and left the answer options out. I do this on purpose to demonstrate one of my favorite ways of tackling a multiple choice question, which is to try and get the answer before you see the options. This one is a little bit lengthier than other questions, so how I want to tackle this one is to first read the lead-in, which is the part here in bold. Why do I want to do that? Well, it's because I want to know ahead of time what I'm looking for as I read this large paragraph. Otherwise, I'm going to be going back and forth a lot and oftentimes not knowing what the purpose of the question is or what I'm supposed to be looking for. So I find this strategy especially useful for lengthier questions. All right, let's read that part together. So the question at the end of the paragraph states, which mechanism of action is responsible for complying with putting his bowl in the sink only when preceded by a series of preferred tasks? What's really sticking out to me here is the highlighted part. So I'm thinking that I'm looking for a theory or a principle, not necessarily a procedure. Mechanism of action implies how something works, how something produces its effect. That is a huge clue. So when I later see the answer choices, I can start to eliminate or question the options that are not theories or principles. So now let's read the entire question. Whenever Louisa needs her child to perform a task he is not interested in completing, she always asks him to do a few favored activities before presenting the instruction. For example, her son does not like clearing the table after a meal and will never take his bowl to the sink when asked. However, he will take his bowl to the sink only if she first asks him to make a milk mustache with his chocolate milk, give her a high five, and go get the remote control for the TV. Which mechanism of action is responsible for complying with putting his bowl in the sink only when preceded by a series of other preferred tasks? So here are the answer choices. We've got matching law, high probability instructional sequence, behavioral momentum, and a thin schedule of reinforcement. So let's tackle these answer choices one by one. Matching law. Hopefully you're able to say, oh, that's a theory, right? It's not a procedure. It's not something I do. So matching law is a theory. Based on my first clue that we already found, this is a viable option, but it might not be the correct theory. So we have to dive a little deeper. Matching law is a theory or principle that explains the relationship between relative response rates and relative reinforcement rates. So it suggests that individuals engage in behavior that is associated or linked to higher rates of reinforcement, and then less likely to engage in behavior that's linked to lower rates of reinforcement. So it does require concurrent schedules of reinforcement, which then forces the individual to make a choice. So matching law, yes, is a theory. It helps explain why one would choose behaving in one way over another, but it doesn't explain why her son or her child complies with putting his bowl away under a very specific circumstance. Now, if the question was a little different, such that her son is asked to put his bowl away, but instead of doing that, he plays video games, okay, a little different. Video games are followed by immediate reward, and putting the bowl away is maybe followed by nothing or a weaker reward, such as a thank you. Then matching law could explain why he goes to video games instead of putting his bowl away. But that's not what's being asked here. So again, in this scenario, there's no concurrent schedule of reinforcement, no choice that has to be made by her son. So matching law does not explain why he complies with that low preferred task. The next answer choice is the high probability instructional sequence, also known as the high P sequence. This is a very tempting option, right? Because procedurally, that is exactly what's happening. I want to walk you through the high P sequence, what it looks like procedurally in relation to this question. So in a high probability instructional sequence, we're going to ask the learner to complete several easy or preferred tasks first, followed by one task they usually avoid. Could be non-preferred, could be something they don't like doing, could be something difficult. But that's the gist of it. So let's take a look at an example or using this scenario. So first, mom asks him to make a milk mustache. Great job. High five, way to go. Go get me the remote control or the TV control. You're amazing. And then go put your bowl in the sink. And maybe some higher quality reinforcer and yay, you did it, or whatever the praise statement is. The key is that the easy tasks, so those first three, are reinforced quickly and consistently, which then builds momentum. Then, when the less preferred task is presented, compliance is more likely and is also followed by a higher quality reinforcer. So in this example, the favored tasks come first, putting the bowl in the sink comes last. But overall, cooperation or compliance continues because reinforcement's already been happening. So notice, reinforcement, 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 a lot of reinforcement. So technically, right, the compliance would continue. So that was a quick little visual to demonstrate the high P instructional sequence in relation to this specific question, because this is definitely an example of using the high probability instructional sequence. But this is where it gets a little tricky, because the question is specifically asking about why or how it works, not necessarily about what's being done. So I'm going to leave this one as an option, but I'm not convinced it's the correct answer because it doesn't explain why he takes his bowl to the sink only when preceded by a series of other preferred tasks. It is a teaching procedure, not a mechanism of action or an explanation, but very, very closely related. So we're going to keep that one in our back pocket until we see the other options. Okay, the next answer choice is behavioral momentum. Behavioral momentum is a theory, so it is a good option so far. Hopefully you're able to define it, what it is, otherwise flag it for further study. Behavioral momentum is a theory used to explain why behavior persists or continues in the face of a disruptor. So let's check out that theory using imagery because that is just way more fun. All right, you're gonna have to put on your imagination caps at this point. Imagine a tiny snowball at the top of a mountain. When you push it, it starts rolling downhill. As it rolls, it's gonna get bigger and faster, picking up more snow along the way. I want you to think of this as the cartoon sense, right? So once it gets going, it doesn't take much effort to keep moving. It's rolling, it's getting bigger, it's getting faster. Now imagine something is in the snowball's path. So in that cartoon version again, the snowball doesn't stop. And so in theory, it should pick up anything that's in its path and continue going. So here, the snowball runs into the person, scoops them up, continues down the hill with even more speed and strength. So in this analogy, the bits of snow it's picking up along the way represent compliance with those high P tasks. Those easy, low effort responses are happening a lot. The person's contacting a lot of reinforcement. Can't forget that part. That is a really important part. The high P responses have to contact reinforcement. So we're not going to forget that. Now, again, imagination land here. The child in the image represents compliance with the low P task or that low P task, whatever it is. High effort. something difficult, maybe even something non-preferred that the person is not complying with. But notice that it's still going. So in other words, whatever contacts reinforcement on the dense schedule should in theory continue happening. So compliance is contacting reinforcement, whether it's a high P or a low P, so compliance should continue happening. So let's tie this back to our question. At the top of the hill, the snowball starts rolling and begins picking up things along the way. Each thing it picks up represents compliance with an easy preferred task, things a child is happy to do. In this example, those are things like making a milk mustache, giving mom a high five, getting the TV remote. Each one's quick, successful, reinforced, and so the snowball gets bigger and faster. Then notice what happens next. The snowball reaches something that would normally stop things. So doing a task the child usually avoids, which in this case is putting the bowl in the sink. But instead of stopping compliance or cooperation, the snowball scoops it up and keeps rolling. So in other words, compliance continues. And that's behavioral momentum in a nutshell in relation to this question. Because cooperation has already been occurring and contacting reinforcement, it continues even when a less preferred task is introduced. So the takeaway here is simple. Behavior that's been reinforced repeatedly is more likely to persist even when the situation becomes harder. The behavior we're talking about in this scenario is compliance or cooperation, reinforced cooperation on a dense schedule. You get cooperation even when things get hard. So let's keep this one as an option as well. The last answer choice is a thin schedule of reinforcement. A thin schedule of reinforcement is also not a mechanism of action. It's a reinforcement schedule. A thin schedule simply means that reinforcement is not being delivered as frequently as and becoming less and less delivered. One thing we know about the high P sequence, which we've identified as occurring here, is that the reinforcement is delivered after each request. So it's actually quite a dense schedule of reinforcement, not thin. It's an FR1 or continuous schedule to be more specific. So compliance with each instruction, whether it's a high P or a low P, will be followed by some quality or form of reinforcement, which helps build that momentum to keep the response going. So we can easily eliminate thin schedule of reinforcement. Okay, almost through here. So we're left with two options that are related, and it is quite common to mix up these two terms. It's tempting to select high probability instructional sequence because Louisa is using the high P instructional sequence to increase compliance with that low P task. However, the high probability sequence is a teaching procedure, not a mechanism of action or explanation of why compliance continued. Right? Behavioral momentum is a theory that essentially explains why the high P sequence works to increase compliance. So given the question is asking about a mechanism of action and not what procedure Louisa is using, let's go ahead and eliminate high P sequence and select behavioral momentum for the correct answer choice to this question. Time to analyze our errors. If you struggled with this item, you may be having trouble identifying the difference between procedures and mechanisms of action or theories. You might be too focused on procedures rather than theories, and keep in mind they are not interchangeable. This is a very common error. So behavioral momentum is not an interchangeable term with high P sequence. Do you know the difference between behavioral momentum and the high P sequence? If not, review the 6th edition TCO item B.22. Some strategies to address this error. You may want to explain behavioral momentum in your own words. This helps deepen your understanding and clearly differentiate it from a high probability instructional sequence. You can also supplement this with writing your own unique examples of high P from your immediate environment, or even practice an instructional sequence with somebody and then explain why it works. I can't leave you without some presents. As usual, here I've listed some helpful resources that we have to help you out in your preparation to master this material. You could take the supplemental quiz that goes with this question quick clip. You can study to fluency using our SAF-Med cards. You can check out our cheat sheets, also known as easy sheets. And don't forget to join our Boost Study and Support group on Facebook. All of these resources are available by clicking on the links in the description box below. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that was helpful. Keep applying what you've learned and success will follow. Happy studying.